Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Dr. Margaret Toscano. This time we're going to dive into the chapter in the book, The September 6th and the Struggle for the Soul of Mormonism. Margaret's going to discuss the chapter on her and her husband Paul in this amazing book. So you won't want to miss this conversation, but it's only available to newsletter subscribers. So go to gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a secret link to the final part of our conversation.
Okay, any more on that? Questions?
I can talk. In terms of Paul and me, as I think I've already said some of what I wanted to say there, that I felt, the chapter on me and Paul is all right. It's not like it's bad or anything. It's just dated?
It's just dated. Like, again, she didn't talk to me.
How have you changed since your 2003 interview with your memory of the September 6th?
I was in a place of a lot of pain. In fact, I'm really proud of myself, Rick. I have not cried in this interview yet. Maybe I will cry before we stop. But I was in a lot of pain, and he even documents that I was crying during that interview. And I thought, oh, great. I get to be the weepy woman, right, who's overly emotional or something. But I was in a lot of pain. But I think that the documentation of that pain is important in the terms of that, being kicked out of your church, even if you're not a believer, is painful. And that's true with David Wright's story. He didn't believe in sort of the foundational kind of faith questions, but Mormonism was his heritage. It was his family. Being, kicked out is really a painful thing. So I think that that's important. That's acknowledged, that's a part of what happens to people. A couple of ways that I'm different. First of all, I remember back in that period, I had friends who said to me, you've just got to walk away, not be involved with this anymore. Don't write anything more about it. You're never going to heal until you just kind of disavow Mormonism. Well, that was not what I felt. And, I went through a process. Where do I want to be? And I maybe have said this already on your show on another interview. I consider myself Mormon. Mm-hmm. I'm not LDS because I'm not part of the church. This is another reason why I just hate that idea that Mormon's a bad term, because I'm proud of being a Mormon. It's my ethnicity, it's my heritage, it's part of who I am. And I have continued to write and research and discuss Mormon issues. So I'm going to write this book about Heavenly Mother. When, back in, 20 years ago, I think I had a harder time saying that I was a believer on some level. I felt ashamed of that, but I've come to a point in my life where I'm not what they call a true believing Mormon, but I believe in God. I mean, my ideas of God are complex. They're not the Mormon views. I believe in an afterlife. I believe in the soul. And I really care about Mormonism. So, I mean, I have, I wouldn't have publicly said stuff about it. I also sometimes call myself a skeptic believer. I'm a person who doubts everything. Could I be wrong? Of course I could be wrong. But I've had experiences. I think it's interesting in Lynn Whiteside's chapter, she talks about, this alternative spiritual journey that she went. She walked out of Mormonism. She got involved in Native American traditions, and she found a different spirituality. Well, I have a private spirituality that's important to me. And it's been a long journey over 20 years. And even as an academic, being, not ashamed to say, yeah, I believe in the soul. I believe in God on some level. And I'm still a really good scholar and intellectual, right? You can believe in things and still be a good scholar. I'm always trying to be objective and, look at things from many points of view. So I've changed in that way, sort of able to claim my spirituality in a way that maybe I couldn't have done 20 years ago. Also, being proud of my work on Mormonism. I'm proud that I did that, chapter is, I'm pointing because it's over there. I have a bunch of books here. If you probably can't see any of them, but I'm proud I did that chapter on a response to the gospel topic on Joseph Smith, women, the priesthood, and the temple. I really enjoyed writing that, and I think it's important, and I'm glad I did it. So when you look at my CV, and of course, here's another thing I kind of critique her for. She leaves me in 2003. Even if I didn't do an interview with her, she could go on the university website and look at my CV and see everything I've done and what I'm doing.
And watch your Gospel Tangents interviews.
And watch my Gospel Tangents interviews. I mean, she doesn't even mention, I don't think, in 2007, there was the PBS special, 2 parts on the Mormons.
Oh, yeah.
I am featured in that. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I was never famous for being one of the September 6th, but that interview, suddenly I was in the limelight, and it's so interesting because there were people that suddenly I was a big hero, and others thought I was just the most horrible woman that ever lived. This sort of stark dichotomy. Neither one are true. I'm not a hero and I'm not a villain, right? So she doesn't document that. But, I'm still working on Mormonism. I still really care. My Mormon heritage is important to me. I want to help the Mormon community still. And I've always felt, I've never seen myself so much as an activist. I've gotten involved in activism, but I see myself more as a scholar and a teacher, a scholar and a teacher. And so, I want that part of my history to be recorded and not just having left back in 2003. So I don't know if you have any more questions about that, but I maybe want to talk about Paul a little bit too.
Well, that's where I was going next.
Yeah, so I think also...
Paul's kind of under the weather, so that's why he's not
Paul's
here.
under the weather. He's upstairs. By the way, he has a lot of opinions about this book, but he hasn't read it. And I've read it twice. But we both talked about it. So she leaves Paul sort of in 2007, where he made a statement about how he lost his faith. Well, I have stacked up here, and you don't need to see them, but I have all the books that Paul has written. And if you read anything after 2007, you would see that he found his faith again. I think Paul sees himself as a Mormon Christian. For him, his testimony of Jesus Christ is really important. And you've talked to him, so you know that, Rick, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. His interpretation of the Book of Mormon all centers around that. And he's written a lot about it. So I think that's something to see with him. Paul is a very complex person. Well, aren't we all really on one level? But he doesn't fit easily into any category. Last summer, we did at Sunstone a panel on sort of a retrospective of the September 6th.
Right.
And Paul and I were on a panel. At the end of that, somebody asked a question, what do you want to be your legacy? And none of us really ever answered it. It kind of got left out there, and then the time was over. But I've thought about that a lot. And I don't think either Paul or I want to be mostly we do not want the September 6th to be the definition of who we were. I don't want to be remembered simply as a dissident. Paul doesn't want to simply be remembered as one of the September 6th. He has written, I don't know if, he's probably written 15 books, which includes the book of theology that he and I did together, his memoir. He's written 4 or 5 novels. He has like 6 books of essays. Way back, he wrote a book on religion in the public schools. He's written so much. I think, of course, I'm the wife. I'm the proud wife. I think he's brilliant. He's a brilliant writer, brilliant essays. Mm-hmm. I would like him to be remembered as a man of Mormon letters. And, he's not just one of the September 6th. And I don't think that either Paul or I have ever seen ourselves as famous.
Just infamous.
We're infamous, I know. But, it's interesting that she talks about Mike Quinn as immortal. And by the way, it's really interesting that Mike, she does sort of see Mike as the sort of the star of the September 6th. I mean, and I know Mike, he's great. He should be remembered. But, I would like my husband Paul to be remembered as a really important Mormon intellectual writer, a man of letters, a man who's a fantastic writer. That's how I would like to see him remembered. Mm-hmm. And, we never know how long any of us are going to live, right? So I hope that our legacy is much more than simply being part of the September 6th. That's not how I want to be remembered as. I'd like to be remembered as an important Mormon scholar and a beloved teacher at the University of Utah. And, my family is very important to me. So, it's interesting. All of us want to be remembered. Remembrance is important, both being remembered and remembering, right? Remembering others, which is why sort of my main objection to her history, that I think there's so much that's important. Many, many people that were involved in these very crucial events of 1993, and they're not being remembered. I don't want them to be erased. I want them to be remembered for the work they've done. I want to be remembered as a friend of Lynn Whiteside's, which you can't get in her book. Lynn's friendship is very important to me. Yeah. And the very fact that she could go in a totally different direction, mm-hmm. and I really respect the work that she does there with people. I think she, it's not just that she's involved in Native American spirituality, but she does counseling. She helps hundreds of people. And, she's such a dear person. Yeah. And I'm proud to be her friend.
I'm glad I finally got to interview her.
Yeah, she's great. And my sister Janice, I think that, Sarah didn't even try to interview her. It's really interesting that Lavina, everybody talks about, Lavina was so spiritual that even though she was excommunicated, she kept going to church, even though she couldn't take the sacrament. They never remember that that's true with Janice.
Right.
Janice still goes to church.
Right.
She quietly, they allow her to make a few comments.
She's in the choir.
She's in the choir. She loves singing in the choir. And another thing that maybe people don't see, Paul, she talks about how Paul and I did not follow the pattern of the patriarchal marriage, and it's true. Paul has never tried to control me, and he knows he better not. On the other hand, both of us respect and listen to the other person, because I think we indeed have a very egalitarian marriage. Mm-hmm. I never could have finished my PhD if Paul hadn't been totally supportive. We do have an egalitarian marriage. And yes, they wanted him to rein me in and control me. But also he was seen as kind of this wild card that they had to X to. It wasn't just because he didn't control me, which you could have kind of got the impression from her chapter. But no, he was challenging the leaders.
Right.
And I think that Boyd Packer saw our book Strangers and Paradox as a threat too, because we challenge a lot about the doctrine, the priesthood mm-hmm. in particular. I think it's important how we're remembered. And, this is not just Mormon history, but Mormon studies in general. We need to document things. And so I love what you're doing, Rick, that you're willing to document. So even if Sarah didn't find out that I've changed over 20 years, you have documented that. So thank you. It's odd, though, that she does quote, in her last chapter, she quotes my article, the Gospel Topics essay. And it's sort of strange. Like, she leaves me in 2003 in the chapter, and then suddenly I'm quoted in that chapter at the end.
Oh.
Yeah, I was glad she did, right? Yeah. So that's nice. But I don't know. So do you have any other questions? I've said a lot, as usual. I have a lot to say.
No, that's great. Can you talk about your relationship with other members of the September 6th? We've talked about, well, obviously Paul.
My sister Janice.
And Michael's gone, and so is Lavina.
Gone. Yeah.
But do you ever talk to Abraham or Maxine or
so
who am I missing?
As I said, I would never say I was a close friend of Mike's, but I was a longtime friend. And there were instances where he would come and stay with Paul and me in our house when he needed a place to stay while he was in Salt Lake. And, you know, all of us, other than Avraham, were always very involved in the Sunstone Symposia, basically until, I don't know, other things drew us away. I was still presenting. I mean, I presented last year at Sunstone. I haven't done that much since COVID, really. But I've done papers. In fact, here's another book I want to write. I have so many unpublished essays that I've never been published, because I was participating in Sunstone from 1984 until probably, 2019 or something. So I have dozens of essays I haven't published, which I would like to do. We'll see how much I can get done before I die, right? So how did I know all of them? So I knew Mike a long time ago, always respected him, not a close friend, I would say, but we definitely talked from time to time and interacted. And, you know, I knew him fairly well, I would say. I knew him for a long time and fairly well. Lavina was actually a close friend. I met Lavina way back at BYU. I told her this later. I knew who she was before she knew who I was. When she was working on her master's in English at BYU, I was working on my undergrad in English, and we both had a class with a wonderful professor named Martin Clark. I just loved him. And she was doing her master's in English. I was doing my undergrad. And people may not believe this now, but I was the shy little student who would never make a comment in class. And she always had opinions that she would express, so I knew who she was. And then later, maybe even, 10 years later, I met her through pilgrimage and Sunstone. And then we became friends, not close friends at first, but she decided in 1993 to participate in Counterpoint Conference, where a lot of other Mormon feminists thought it was too radical. So she took a stand in 1993. In 1992, she decided to become one of the trustees of the Mormon Alliance and work on the case reports, which Sarah does a good job of talking about that. By the way, I'm so glad that Sarah did an interview with Lavina before she died.
Yeah.
Even though it was
Wish I could have gotten one.
I know. So I've known Lavina, I've known her pretty well since 1984. And so we were involved in Counterpoint. We were involved in, all of these other events. In the last 10 years, Lavina and I were in a book club together.
Oh.
So Janice and Lavina and I, actually Lynn belongs too, but she's always off in Peru or someplace, and she only comes to our book group like once a year.
Right.
And Lavina's daughter-in-law, Marina Capella, joined our book group.
Oh.
So I've become a good friend with Marina, whom I really love, and I've known Christian since he was a little boy, right? So I know her very well. So Mike has been a longtime friend, very close to Lynn, very close to Lavina, obviously close to Janice and my husband. Maxine I've known a long time, and I respect Maxine a lot, and we've interacted a lot, but we've never had the friendship like I had with either Lavina or Lynn. But I respect Maxine. Her book that she did, A Women in Authority, is it was very important book, and I really appreciate her work and scholarship on that book. So I appreciate her and admire her, and I've interacted with her in all kinds of, she was involved in the Mormon Women's Forum for a while too. So, I respect and like her, but we've never really been close friends. Avraham I knew, but I haven't at all kept in touch with him. Interestingly, last summer before the Sunstone Symposium, Kathy Gigliotti, she doesn't go by Gigliotti anymore. I think she goes by Wilson. I'm trying to remember what her new name is. She and Avraham divorced.
Oh, okay.
And they had 9 children together.
Wow.
And they were married for quite a long time, but there were a lot of conflicts. She's writing some kind of a memoir and not giving a good picture of Avraham.
Oh.
So we'll see if that comes out. So I knew Kathy quite well too.
Okay.
But I hadn't, talked to her for years. So that was interesting. And I saw her at Sunstone. She was there at Sunstone.
Okay.
So, but again, all these other people too. I've met David Wright. I've met a lot of the different people. I think that, one of the sad things I see now in Mormon studies is that, like everything else, I think Mormon studies has become polarized. It used to be that you could come from different perspectives, but we were all part of a community. I think now a lot of the people who are in Mormon studies will not quote me because I'm excommunicated, and that makes me sad. Mm-hmm. So in my book on the Heavenly Mother, I'm going to quote everybody. Because I think good scholarship is looking at all of the voices and so forth. So I feel sad about that with Mormon studies, that there are some of those divisions that you see in other places. Anyway.
And then one last question. Can you talk about how Sunstone has changed over the years?
Yes.
Because it seems, from my perspective, especially with talking with people like you, because I didn't start going till 10 years ago, probably 15, maybe. Back in the 80s especially, Mark Hoffman would bring his finds, and some people would say, well, it wasn't as scholarly of a conference, that's why Mark did it. But it does seem like it focused more on scholarship. Lately, it seems like it's more on my personal experience with the church and less on scholarship. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. And I mean, there was, I think at the beginning, there was a lot of emphasis on scholarship. And although Peggy and Alan started where they wanted to broaden the venue of Mormon scholarship, so it was not just historians, that you could have theologians or
poets even.
Poets or I'm thinking of people who were in behavioral science or sociology, Murray Cornwall working on kind of more social issues of women. You had all kinds of scholarship. There was really an emphasis on scholarship. And I thought that was really good. They did have a place for personal voices too. So that was another good thing about it. They emphasized scholarship in a very strong way, but you could have some personal voices. Like they used to have the Pillars of My Faith. Now I think it's Why I Stay or something like that.
And they've never asked Janice. I can't believe that.
I know. That bothers me that they've never asked Janice. I mean, they could ask me. I mean, in a way, I stay I'm a Mormon, right?
You've stayed in the field. Yeah,
I've stayed in the field, but Janice should be asked way before I am because she has really stayed, right? So I think that the way I look at it now, and this is not totally fair, but this has been sort of my objection, is that you used to have, I think, a wider range of people from different perspectives and more of a emphasis on scholarship. So you could have people who were still very much believers, but they had scholarship. Maybe they were philosophers, theologians, whatever, and they would come and talk. Like I remember the days in the 1980s where Blake Ostler, who's written a lot of books about Mormon theology, he and Paul would get in these big debates.
Oh.
It was fun. But you don't have that anymore. I don't know that Blake would ever go to something like Sunstone anymore. What I see now is sort of like, it feels like the three groups are, you've always had a strong community of Christ presence there. I used to know Bill Russell was a friend of mine.
Yeah, Bill's awesome. He's still around.
I'm so glad he's still around. I love Bill.
Yeah.
And I love the community.
He's slowing down, though.
Yeah, all of us are a little bit, right? So I really love the community of Christ. I have to say that I'm really happy that because of Lindsay, you also have sort of more fundamentalists who are willing to come and participate. We always had Ann Wild, right?
Yes.
Ann Wild was always a faithful Sunstone person.
She still seems like she comes a lot, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Ann Wild is in our book group.
Oh, nice.
Vicki Eastman is there. Ann Wild. Lavina was there. Her daughter,
I think I need to
Marina.
get the invitation to this.
Yeah, this book group is great. But now it seems like you have the community of Christ people. a bigger group of fundamentalists, and then a bunch of kind of angry ex-Mormons. And I feel like there's not as much of sort of a middle space for either scholarship or kind of Janice speaking at Why I Stay, somebody who's a different point of view. I mean, you do have Bob Reese. I met Bob Reese way back.
Yeah.
And I knew his wife, Gloria, way before they got married. She was in some of the Mormon feminist groups. So, I mean, I think there's still good things that happen there. I'm not trying to be negative about it, but I think it has changed.
Yeah, the scholarship has shrunk a lot.
I think the scholarship has shrunk. I think it's harder for people who are still in the church to find a place there. One of the things that used to happen back in the 80s and 90s, especially the 80s, is there were so many people who were active in the church but had questions, and they saw Sunstone as a place where they could feel kind of like they could still be in the church because they had Sunstone every year to look forward to, where they could hear dissenting voices or scholarship and question things. But their membership was important to them. Mm-hmm. And I think there are fewer of those people who attend now. Is that
because of the 1991 statement against
No,
symposia?
I don't think that did it. I think that there were several blows. I mean, the 1991 meant that if you were at BYU or in CES, we used to have CES people and BYU people who would attend.
Now they have to come incognito.
Yeah, with the disguise.
Usually they come, but they don't present. It's been my experience.
They used to present, actually. Yeah. I'm trying to remember, a few that did. But also, I just think that the people who are still active in the church but questioning don't feel like that there are sessions that work for them as much anymore.
Right.
Whereas they liked the sort of more scholarly, and they also liked, talking about, how you could question but still stay or something. Mm-hmm. I mean, I met Eugene England at Sunstone. That was when I first met him. I met him in 1984, right after I gave my famous missing rib speech. He wanted to meet me, and I got to know him and Charlotte and his daughters. And so, yeah, there were fun things that happened then. And I think it has changed. And I see it as kind of sad that I think that there was a broader range of kind of types of discourse that you could have. Mm-hmm. But I think it still does some good. Yeah. And that I'm glad it hasn't died yet. Yeah. So I think that's good.
Well, cool. Any last words?
I've said a lot. I'm sure I could think of something else, but I think we're okay, Rick.
All right.
Until the next time, after my Heavenly Mother book comes out.
There you go. Any ideas when that'll be?
No, I mean, I'm trying to finish the manuscript by next year, so okay. I've started on it, definitely.
2 or 3 years away, probably still.
Probably before it's published, at least that long. But we'll see. Anyway.
All right.
Anyway, thank you, Rick, for having me, for letting me talk and give my views. Again, I'm not trying to be too negative about the book. I do have really strong critiques because I think there's a lot missing. But I'm glad Sara wrote it, and I hope she writes another book about the LGBTQ issues, because it seems like that's the thing she's really passionate about.
Okay.
Okay?
Cool. All right. Well, Dr. Margaret Toscano, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for having me, as always, Rick. You take care.
Thanks. You too.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Margaret Toscano. Margaret, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It's always fun to talk to you, and I can't wait to talk about Heavenly Mother. In our next conversation, I'm excited to have Cheryl Bruno back on the show, and I'll let her introduce the topic.
I'm Cheryl Bruno, and the newest book I have out is called Secret Covenants. Right there.
All right.
And it's about early Mormon polygamy.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt, so check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.